Hello and welcome to The Art of Crime at the Hodgepodge YouTube channel. This is a series where I hope to merge the world of true crime with the art world, as I am an artist from the UK and I absolutely love true crime. So I thought, you know what, there's a little bit of a gap in the market there for a bit of true crime knowledge. I have watched pretty much every YouTuber out there with regards to true crime, but not very many people tend to look at the theft of art rather than standard possessions, or an artist turns out to be a criminal. It could be any tedious link, and that is what I'm going to be hopefully diving into in this series. So I hope you like it. If you do, please feel free to give us a like and a subscribe, that would be amazing. But for the first one that I'm going to discuss with you and have a chat with you about is the formidable Olive Wharry. Now, I hope I'm saying her surname correctly. I apologise massively in advance if I am not. I will try to do better, and again, if it looks like I'm looking away or anything like that, it's because I'm getting used to this new setup. I'm not used to doing my podcasts on my own or like this. So we'll run with it, so please bear with me. So Olive was born on the 29th of September of 1886 into a middle class family in London. She was the only child from her father's first marriage, and she did stay with her father, and her father went on to have another 4 children, 3 brothers, which were obviously Olive's 3 half-brothers, and a half-sister who were extremely much younger than Olive herself. Her father, he was a doctor. When he retired from medicine, he moved the family down to Devon, where after leaving school, Olive became an art student in Exeter. In 1906, she travelled around the world with her father and her stepmother for quite a while. From what I could find, there wasn't any definitive dates, but it was for quite a while. In November of 1910, Olive actually became an active member of the Women's Social and I always get this the wrong way around, the Social and Political Union, which is the WSPU. I'm hoping I'm getting that the right way. Which was a women's only political movement within the UK at that time, and as we know, at that time women didn't really stand to gain a lot at all when it came to politics. We couldn't even vote at that point. WSPU was a women's only political movement that campaigned for women's rights within women's suffrage, and this was all in the UK in between the 1900s right up until 1918, although the group became more commonly known around 1906, I believe, as the Suffragettes. That's where they officially became the Suffragettes. If you don't know who the Suffragettes are, where have you been for a start? Especially if you are a woman from the UK. I really hope you have heard of the Suffragettes. If not, hopefully this will help you a little bit. But if you're not familiar with them, one of the main purposes of the Suffragettes was campaigning for women's rights and women's rights to vote by means of demonstrations, rallies, pretty much, as you'll see, anything goes when it comes to campaigning for the women's rights. They even took part in things called hunger strikes, which, more on that later, hold that thought. A year after joining the women's SPU, Olive was actually arrested in a window smashing campaign. Luckily for Olive, thanks to, and I'm going to get these names wrong, so I apologise in advance again. You'd think I'd be better because I'm actually from England, but no. I'm going to double check my notes, so bear with me while I'm looking off. But this was thanks to Mrs. Sol Solomon and Frederick Petherick Lawrence, which is an awesome name. He was actually a British politician for the Labour Party. She was granted bail because they guaranteed it. They guaranteed Olive's bail on her behalf for her. To most at the time, especially with Frederick guaranteeing or taking part in guaranteeing Olive's bail for her, it could have actually been seen as a scandalous move at the time, because women were still seen as second-class citizens. So it was a politically scandalous move of the era, with him being a Labour Party Member of Parliament. However, he actually openly campaigned for women's suffrage, just like Olive. So, two peas in a pod. Campaigning for the same deal, which is always good. The two of them were both campaigning. Although a lot of people talk about women's suffrage and the suffragettes, there were actually quite a few male supporters of their movement, as you will come to know a little bit later on. But Olive received her first prison sentence of 2 months for window smashing, and something that she began in prison was actually a scrapbook, which has been shown in museums across the UK. After Olive's release from prison, she wasn't deterred by her time at all. In fact, in March of 1912, she was arrested again. So literally a few months later, she was arrested again for more window smashing. I love it. This time she received a sentence of 6 months, and she was held at Winston Green Prison, which is now known as HMP Birmingham. So whilst she was there, she took part in her very first hunger strike. Now, I mentioned them a little bit earlier, but I wanted to talk about them a little bit more because they do play a massive part in Olive's life. Not just Olive's life alone, in the suffragettes as a whole, to be honest. Obviously, I do a lot of research I did a lot of research for this video, and one of the best sources I found was actually from the Museum of London when it came to suffragettes and hunger strikes. And according to them, there are 6 things you need to know about hunger strikes. Number 1, the hunger strikes themselves actually started off as an individual act of defiance, purely because when you're in prison, there's not a fat lot you can do. Especially in the suffragettes range, they'd already been arrested, they had already been jailed for campaigning for women's rights and the rights to vote. There wasn't a fat lot more they could actually do from within the prison to show their defiance even further. They'd been arrested, what else could they do? So they actually started to control what was going in their mouths, hunger strikes. They were essentially a dangerous form of non-violent protest from prison. So they weren't going to be beating up other prisoners to get attention that way. It was non-violent because they were just doing it to themselves. It could be carried out from the comfort of their prison cells. The first suffragette to actually go on hunger strike was a lady called Marion Wallace Dunlop, and she was actually sentenced to a prison sentence at Holloway Prison, which is actually a really infamous prison here within the UK. And the reason she was sent to Holloway was she was charged with willfully causing malicious damage or maliciously damaging the House of Commons. The reason she went on hunger strike I actually found extremely interesting, because she was classified as a 2nd division criminal. Now, I had to look into this a lot because I couldn't believe I understand that there's different areas of prisons, but back then it was very, I suppose you could look at it like people on, as an extreme example, people on death row to people who were just serving a short-term sentence. But that's just me being really naive at trying to explain it. But she was seen as a 2nd division prisoner. A 2nd division criminal prisoner, sorry. Now, had Marion been a man, and a man who had committed the charge that she had been actually sent to prison for, so willfully and maliciously causing damage to the House of Commons, had she been a man and completed the same crime by willfully or maliciously causing damage to the House of Commons, she would have been classed in the 1st division, not the 2nd. Why? And why is it such a big deal? Why is it a big deal that a man committing the same offence would be classed as a first division prisoner, and why is it that the woman completing the same crime would be classed as a second division? I asked myself the same question, and you may think, why is it such a big deal? Why does it matter? Because, you know, prison's prison, right? It doesn't matter, you're both locked away. Wrong. Check out these images that I've managed to find. So in these two images, the one on the left, the prison cell is that of a second division prisoner. The one on the right is a first division prisoner, which is a political offence. Those who are classed as a first division prisoner have completed a political offence, and they get the nice cushy cell with the nice desk. Marion was classed as a second division because she was a woman. The joy. The joy. Absolutely mental. I couldn't believe it when I read it. I really, really couldn't. So even in a goddamn prison, women were treated differently. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And this is the exact reason why I vote. 100%. 100% the reason that I vote in the UK. Because of these women. Marion, back to the story of Marion, hunger struck for several days. This was from the 5th of July, I believe, when she was asked by the doctor what she was going to eat. She replied with such grace, "My determination," to which he replied, "Indigestible stuff, but tough, no doubt." After fasting for 91 hours, which, now I'm a hungry person, I can go not long without food, so to these women, ultimate respect. And for 91 hours she fasted. She was released by the prison because they were afraid. They were afraid she might die, so that's why she was released. Clearly they don't know how to handle women. Or didn't know how to handle women. Jeez. Many other suffragettes did this, and they followed Marion's lead. Whenever they were arrested, they would go on hunger strike in the hopes of being released earlier so that they could get back out and start campaigning again. Made complete sense. As dangerous as it is, it made complete sense. Because they could get back to the protests and help with their other suffragettes out there to get on with the job that they all set themselves. And I couldn't be more thankful that they did that. So just ban that out there. Number 2. That was a very long number 1, by the way, so I apologise. But number 2, authorities quickly, or should I say eventually, cottoned on to what the women were doing, that they were going on hunger strike to get out of prison quicker. And so to prevent early release, they decided to start forcibly feeding anyone that went on hunger strike. Yeah, that was their response to women going on hunger strike. We won't let them out, we'll force feed them instead. So anyone that went on hunger strike got force fed. Now, this wasn't someone watching you physically eat. It wasn't someone standing in the room and making sure you ate whatever was put in front of you. This was the prison wardens, the wardesses, the medical staff, the doctors, physically restraining these women. And I've seen images, and I'm not going to put any in, but you can go and find posters and things. I mean, there is one poster that I will try and find and pop in if I can, that the suffragettes actually did themselves. And yeah, it looks, I mean, it's not even a real photograph, but it looks bloody terrifying. And what they did was physically restrained these prisoners whilst forcing a rubber tube down their nose or throat, whichever, my guess is whichever one they could get it down easier. Not that either of them are going to be easy, especially when someone's physically fighting you to not put it down there. But yeah, that's what they were doing, forcing a rubber tube down your neck to make you eat. They created mixtures of eggs, milk, other liquids, anything that could be used in a funnel, basically. And the rubber tube, they'd use a funnel on top of the rubber tube to basically put this concoction directly into the prisoner's stomach. Now, personally, I would have thought that releasing them would have been the easier option, but no. Suffragettes would not only have to suffer the pipe being forcibly put down their nose or throat, but they also had to suffer things such as broken teeth from having it forced down their throats, bleeding, vomiting, even choking, because if they put it in the wrong hole, when you're being it's not like you're being put on under anaesthetic or anything like that and having a breathing tube or feeding tube put down you. They're physically forcing it in there, and your esophagus obviously could lead to your airways, and sometimes it went down the wrong tube. They're very close together, so some of them actually choked, physically choked, whilst these things were being forced down their throats because it went into the lungs by mistake, not the stomach. Yeah. The suffragettes were able to use this to their advantage, and they did use it to their advantage in the media. And that is by creating graphic illustrations of what the doctors and wardens and wardesses, as I said, were doing to them, which, when released to the public, actually caused a massive public outcry, and rightfully so, and concern at such a brutal treatment of vulnerable women. Because let's face it, they were still women, they were still seen as vulnerable, even though they were extremely, extremely strong. But they would have been vulnerable if they're on hunger strike, and they were still being force-fed. Yeah. Number 3, men went on hunger strike too. As I mentioned earlier on, there were men who supported the suffragettes, and they too went on hunger strike. Suffragettes were not alone, thankfully. I think we would have had a much harder fight if we didn't have allies back then in the male race, some of which also went on hunger strike. One of the well-known cases of a male going on hunger strike was actually a gentleman called Hugh A. Franklin. He was a member of the Men's Political Party, the WSPU's counterpart, so the male version of what Olive Wharry was actually a member of. He was jailed in 1910 when he took a whip to the Home Secretary. The then Home Secretary that he took a whip to was Winston Churchill. The Winston Churchill. Hugh A. Franklin took a whip to Winston Churchill. You just can't imagine it happening, can you? So yes, whilst he was imprisoned, he too went on hunger strike. Number 4, suffragettes played a massive game of cat and mouse with the government and the law, basically. In 1913, the government were becoming more and more concerned and worried about how to handle these women who were going on hunger strike, and with the bad press that they were getting. I think more so for the bad press. Adult governments tend to not like it, and the concern of a potential death in their custody of a hunger striking prisoner. Because of this, they passed a Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act. This became known by the suffragettes as the Cat and Mouse Act. This allowed prisoners basically to be released when they were ill after going on hunger strike. However, they were released to get better, only to then be rearrested to serve the rest of their sentence. So as soon as a prisoner's health improved, when they reappeared in public, they would be rearrested again to serve the rest of their sentence. It was condemned as cruelty by many for letting prisoners go and then catching them again, exactly the same way that a cat would play with a mouse, hence the Cat and Mouse Act. Many suffragettes actually used this to their advantage. So basically when they were released, they'd go on the run, they'd go into hiding, they'd use aliases, anyway, to basically get away from having to go back into prison, but still being able to get on with their protests. They basically used it as an advantage to keep their freedom. Absolutely don't blame them, to be honest. And they kept refuge at a number of safe houses across the UK. Number 5. The suffragettes actually treated the hunger strike like a military campaign. It wasn't just, oh, I'm just not going to eat today. They even gave out medals, which I'll pop on screen for you. This is one of the hunger strike medals. They would be issued these medals from the leaders of the WSPU, usually at breakfast receptions after their release. So their first meal after their release, that is when they would be issued with the hunger strike medal. Number 6. Hunger and thirst strikes could be deadly. As I said earlier on, they are extremely dangerous practices which should not be carried out, just to put that out there. Because you never know, on the internet these days people will copy anything you say. No, don't do it. Basically, although there were not any cases of suffragettes dying in prison from hunger strike, the lack of food and water was actually extremely dangerous and always carried a severe risk. It was a risk of serious injury. It wasn't to be taken lightly. It wasn't just a quick get out of jail free card, as it could be seen, potentially. One example of it causing extreme injury is actually a lady called Elsie Harvey. Now, Elsie Harvey took part in hunger striking, and after she received force feeding, so someone physically force fed her within prison, she required 4 months of medical treatment after her release from prison. 4 months of medical treatment to recover from having that tube shoved down her throat. Her mother actually wrote a letter to the Suffragettes Fellowship, and her quote from that letter was, her beautiful voice was ruined. So not only had it damaged her and she needed 4 months of recovery after having had it forced down her throat, it actually damaged her voice box, which is scary. So that is the 6 things that you apparently need to know about hunger striking, and they are a need to know basis, because it pretty much sets the scene for the rest of the story of Olive. So back to Olive's story. She completed her hunger strike just before she was released in July of 1912. I'm not sure if this was because she had been released on under the Cat and Mouse Act or not. It wasn't 100% clear, but she was released anyway towards the end of July 1912. However, by November of the same year, she clearly felt more herself, if it was that she was poorly, because she was arrested again. She was actually arrested alongside 3 other suffragettes after being involved in a scuffle with a gentleman, and this gentleman was called David Lloyd George, just 3 years before David Lloyd George became Prime Minister. So Olive actually had a run-in with a Prime Minister-to-be just 3 years before he became Prime Minister, which is mental. However, in this instance, Olive actually used an alias, which she did multiple times throughout time in the Suffragettes. She used the alias this particular time as Joyce Locke. This time she received a 5-day prison sentence. She was arrested. She didn't go on hunger strike in this instance, but she did manage to smash her cell windows in. She does like a bit of window smashing, doesn't she, our Olive? I love it. Now, by this time, Olive had had many runs in with the law by this point, probably more than I've actually discussed in this episode. However, the one that she is probably most renowned for, or well known for, is actually the Kew Garden Arson. Now, this place it was then, and it still is, a major tourist attraction. So if you're thinking in 1912, it was reported that from the months of June to September that year, the Kew Gardens actually received, I believe, 3.8 million visitors in just those few short months. That's a lot of people for back then. Imagine the amounts of people that they still see today. It's a beautiful place. I haven't been lucky enough to go there myself. One of the places on my list to do. But yeah, very, very massive back then, as it is today. And it was because they had 3.8 million visitors that it was actually an area of interest for the suffragettes. Somewhere with this much attention warranted a suffragette's interest. Somewhere with this much attention, if anything were to happen to it, would actually gather a lot of attention because of the amount of interest already in the place that they're looking at. So basically it was a no-brainer. If they wanted attention, and the way that these guys go around getting the attention for their cause is to cause damage and destruction. So somewhere such as a tourist attraction is a basically no-brainer. They know that if something were to happen to this place, they would get the attention that they wanted for their cause. A few weeks before the Kew Garden Arson, there was actually another attack nearby, actually at the orchid houses, which were quite close to Kew Gardens. And the reason this was of interest to the suffragettes is because the news of the orchid houses and everything that had happened there in their attack actually went worldwide, literally worldwide. It was across the sea, the news of it went everywhere. Some people say it even travelled as far as Puerto Rico. So it would make sense that a similar attraction nearby would gather a similar amount of news traction. Same sort of exposure. So now Olive was aged 27. Along with a lady called Lillian Lenton, she and Lillian went and set fire to the tea pavilion at Kew Gardens after checking there was no one inside. The fire caused £900 worth of damage. Now, it doesn't sound a lot of money, does it, £900? But if you're thinking back in 1912 and the conversion rates between then and now, it's going to be a pretty deep hole in the pocket that is going to have made. So much so that the pavilion itself was only actually insured for £500. £500. Now, I'm a small business owner. I know that for me to go to a place like Kew Gardens or somewhere local where I've never actually vended at Kew Gardens, but I have vended at places like Weston Park and Weston Hall. And to be able to vend at these places, I need £2 million worth of liability cover. £2 million worth. So if you're thinking that these guys were only insured for £500, that's how much of a difference it is. It's scary to think how much difference. So that's how much damage was caused. It went from these beautiful tea rooms and gardens to a shell of rubble and charcoal. It was obliterated completely. Both Olive and Lillian were arrested. They were caught near the scene not long after the fire, and they were both charged. Olive was charged again under the name of Joyce Locke. What's actually quite sad is Olive believed that the Kew Gardens was owned by the Crown, and it was actually quite sad when she realised it wasn't. It was owned by two ladies. Although it was sad, what Olive had to say about this after she found out that she had ruined these two women's business was that she hoped that they understood, that she hoped that because they were women, they would understand the cause that Olive was fighting for with the suffragettes. And something that she was quoted to have said at the time was that even in war, men combatants had to suffer. So basically meaning that I'm sorry that I've burnt your business down, but it is for the greater good kind of thing, which obviously isn't going to help these poor women and the destroying of the business. For this arson though, Olive was sentenced to 18 months in prison, and she was actually ordered to pay costs to the women for it as well. However, it was reported when she was arrested and when she was charged, she actually cried out, I will refuse to do so. You can send me to prison, but I'll never pay the costs. On the 7th of March, she was actually sent to Holloway Prison, that renowned prison that we were talking about a little bit earlier on, where Marion went to. She went on hunger strike there for 32 days. I can go one day, if I'm lucky, without food. One day. How these women did it, I have no idea. And not only did she go on food strike for 32 days, she did so undetected. No one knew she was on hunger strike. How can you not know if someone's on hunger strike for 32 days? You are going to lose weight. You're going to think something's seriously wrong. But no, it was undetected. But she did it by passing her food to the other prisoners, who obviously are going to gladly accept it, because I'm guessing back then the rations were probably not that great anyway, for what little they got. In May 1913, her father, Dr. Wherry, was actually served with a writ for the costs of the Kew Garden Arson on behalf of Olive, because obviously he was her father, he had money, and that's who they went to reclaim this money for the two ladies that were obviously affected by the arson. This actually resulted in Olive Wherry's father being arrested for the assault of the process server who travelled to Holsworthy, where her father lived, to deliver the court writ. He was actually assaulted. When she was released after being detected finally for hunger striking, Olive was released under the Cat and Mouse Act. When she was feeling better though, she was actually rearrested and sentenced to a week in prison. This was because she basically went back to the cause and started protesting, causing more annoyment to the government. So she was rearrested. This time she served just 3 days of her sentence and was released after beginning another hunger strike. So not having been recovered from much from her last one, she already started another, and they just basically released her. She kept herself busy though, as in June that year she was arrested after another altercation, this time a meeting being held again by Lloyd George, and again she went on hunger strike, and this was in Carnarvon. She was released again under the Cat and Mouse Act, and once she was released she made her way up to Liverpool. She wasn't there long though, sadly, when she was rearrested and she wasn't in Liverpool for long when she was found and actually returned to Carnarvon to serve the rest of her sentence. She was basically now issued with a 3-month sentence because she'd been rearrested. I don't know about you, but as someone who, I've mentioned it many times throughout this video, as someone who does get hangry extremely easily, this would have driven me insane. The fact that in, out, and then stop eating, stop eating. It would have driven me insane, especially not having food. Food is my comfort, one of, and yeah, if I'm not getting it, I'm hangry, to the point it would probably drive me insane. And the thing is, some of her doctors actually thought that she was genuinely insane. It's absolutely crazy. Either that, or it was easier to believe that she was insane over the reasons why she was taking part in these political agendas, in fighting the fight for the suffragettes. Maybe it was easier for the doctors to think, actually, yes, she is insane, she's got to be crazy, why is she doing this? Instead of actually understanding the reasons why she would want to do it and the reasons behind it. You know, tomato, whichever way you want to look at it, but let's face it, she was doing it with purpose. It wasn't because she was insane. And the insanity claim can be easily dismissed from people even looking at her scrapbook that I mentioned at the start of the video. It's very coherent, it makes sense. She's not talking in riddles or anything like that, although she does write poetry. But actually, she documented her time during prison, and she documented her time not only in Holloway, where she had was moved to after being in Carnarvon. She was moved to Holloway, but all her other prisons that she'd been to as well. And let's face it, she'd been in a few under different aliases as well. And the scrapbook, which is held by the British Library, held drawings of prison life, poems, and even autographs of fellow suffragettes. It also had a record of her weight loss on her release from prison. It was because of this hunger strike that Olive actually received the Hunger Strike Medal for Valour from the WSPU, which rightfully so after the amount that she went through, which she did. And as mentioned before, lots of people actually received this medal. She was finally released from Holloway into the care of Dr. Flora Murray. It was under the government's amnesty of suffrage prisoners. The government, released prisoners who had been arrested for any suffrage crimes as an amnesty in August of 1914, followed by Emmeline Pankhurst, who's probably a more well-known suffragette, ending all suffrage activities soon after that. And the reason that this was stopped, and the reason that these women were released, and men were released, was because of the World War. At this point, war had broken out, and it's actually one of the turning points for the suffragettes as a whole, I believe, because the reason Emmeline stopped any suffragette activities was because of the war. Now, it wasn't because they changed their mind. It wasn't because, oh, well, let's not bother, there's a war going on, we'll wait until it passes. They actually gained a lot of support from the public. The suffragettes, after ending the suffrage actions, as I said, Emmeline Pankhurst stopped them shortly after the amnesty of the suffrage prisoners being released. And the reason this was because of the war. The fact was, the suffragettes stopped their activities to help, and they wanted to help the war efforts. It's crazy, isn't it? Absolute crazy. It just goes to show what these women were and what they stood for. They didn't want to just cause a ruckus. They wanted to coincide with everyone, but with equal rights, and rightfully so. But I'm going to look at my notes to say, because I don't want to get these words wrong, but they announced that they had to fight for their country as they had fought for the vote. And the reason that this is because it was now not a question of votes for women, but of having any country left to vote in, which I thought was so... It sends chills down my spine, even just thinking about it. And it was this that actually really changed people's opinions of the suffragettes. A lot of people saw suffragettes as troublemakers, as vandalisers, troublemaking, peace-disturbing people, but this actually changed a lot of people's views, and it's actually seen as one of the turning points for women, because it shifted public opinion. And the reason it shifted public opinion is because they were standing up for everyone. They weren't just thinking about themselves. They weren't thinking about themselves. They were actually thinking about everyone else. And it really shifted public opinion when it came to the end of the war, because let's face it, while the war was on, everyone was busy. It ultimately shifted public opinion in their favour, which actually resulted in their partial, I have to say that word, partial. So they received a partial enfranchisement in 1918, which basically means if it hadn't, in layman's terms, if it hadn't have been for the Great War, as it was known then, or World War One, God knows how long the suffragettes would have been fighting for. It's as blunt as that, isn't it? It can be really put down to the fact that if it hadn't been for the war and the women really getting stuck in, we wouldn't have had partial enfranchisement in 1918. Only partial. Better than nothing at that point. So yeah, it would have continued on forever, I think, or until at least our generation were born, because we would have kicked their bastards. I think it would have gone on forever. Well, it wouldn't have gone forever because the women would have kept at it. Even their descendants would have carried on, even if they hadn't been successful. But thank God they were. Yeah, so absolutely crazy. But after Olive's release, she made her way back to Torquay, Devon Way. And yeah, whilst there was no need for her to be acting in the Suffragettes anymore, she actually kept herself really busy. On her release, after she obviously recovered from her hunger strike, Olive actually resumed her art career, which I love. She has some stunning pieces, and she took part in an art exhibition at Exeter Museum, which was in 1917. This was before the partial enfranchisement, and in this it was just an exhibition for people from Devon, so artists who are from Devon, and she completed her artworks using different mediums, sketches, my personal favourite watercolours, etchings. She had some beautiful things, and some of which are still held now by the Royal Albert Museum. In later years she took an active role in a local amateur dramatics club, and as well as giving lectures. She did so much. She also actually became the secretary of a district women's union association. So basically what she was doing at the SPU, but for another association that was very, very similar. One thing I could not find about Olive was actually she, at the age of 61, passed away. Now there is conflicting information. A lot of people say that she passed away in a nursing home, and a lot of sources say that she actually passed away at home at Dartbank, which is in Torquay, Devon. So yeah, I'm not actually 100% certain what actually killed her, or why, or where she... I'm not actually sure why she died or where she died, from conflicting reports, so apologies for that. But yeah, it's absolutely crazy. But at her request, when she passed away, she was cremated, and at her request she was scattered, and she requested to be scattered in the open spaces of the moor between Exeter and Winston. So yeah, that is the story of Olive Wharry. Yes, a very tedious link, but she was a criminal, and this is the art of crime. So I really hope you've enjoyed this. I absolutely love researching and learning a bit more about art that I didn't know, and about people that I didn't necessarily think were criminals. So I will have a different case or person of interest for you in the next week. I really hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about Olive, and if you have, please do give us a like and thumbs up. I'd really, really appreciate it. We will be back next week with another case. I'm not sure which one yet. I will have to have a look and get my research head on ready. I really do hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have talking about it. It is one of my passions. I absolutely love art. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have creating this content for you. If it is that you would like to see any particular art themed crimes, please let me know. Tedious links always welcome, and I really, really hope you've enjoyed it. Please give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more of us, and if you'd like to support the channel, we have a Ko-fi link a little listed below in the comments. Thanks ever so much guys, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!